love, and I regulatory genomics during my PhD. So I actually work, part of my work is actually with Alejandra, that we'll talk just after. And I did a lot of things around ChIP-seq data analysis, and now we are moving to the single-cell transcriptomics. So I'm really interested in what Sandrine was actually saying. And one point that was very important for me is that during 5 years, I've been heading the French Bioinformatics Society. So it was a huge part also of my life to promote bioinformatics in France. So that's it.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Thank you very much, Morgane. Okay. We can hear you now.
Good. Sorry, mini heart attack. It's not a conference without something happening. Yeah, so as Selene said, I work at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. My main line of work, as Morgane was saying, it's regulatory genomics. So I actually collaborate a lot with her and her team. So I did my PhD in Mexico. So, and then I moved on to do my postdoc at SickKids Hospital in Toronto. And so it has been quite experience because also my PhD was a half and half with the Free University in Brussels, where I actually met Morgane. And so I had the experience of doing the Mexican version, Latin American, Europe, and a bit North America. So I have the chance to see how different cultural work cultures are, like how much time you spend in the lab even can be different. And that's something that I enjoy learning because I think it helps the way my lab works now. And yeah, so that's research. Yeah, that's what I do, regulatory genomics, mainly autoimmune diseases. And so I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Selene, for organizing this panel.
Thank you very much, Alejandra. I realized I forgot to introduce myself. So my name is Elena Fernandez Valverde, and I work at the Advanced Genomics Unit Langevio of Simvestat in Guanajuato, Mexico, and I'm also a bioinformatician. I will only be moderating today, but well, I do have some insight into being a bioinformatician and a woman in science. Okay, so we will continue with another short round. Talking a bit more about your experiences as a woman in science in particular. And I would say as a bioinformatician, we know that in biology, the bias, the representation of women as we are not as underrepresented as in other areas, but we are a bit more so in the computational sciences. So if you could please, we'll start with Alejandra and continue on in the
There was some nice here. Yeah, so I actually never realized that there were some differences of my experience compared to other students until I started going to conferences. Actually, that's one of the things where you see that being a woman in bioinformatics was a bit different, particularly at the beginning. So I'm not as young as I look. So some years ago, you could see that the conferences were mainly guys. And then that made an atmosphere a bit challenging for women to get included, to go to, particularly in conferences where networking is so important. I didn't feel that it was as easy as other people to get involved in going for a beer, or because also I didn't really feel comfortable at all times. And then there's also the part where you learn that you waste a lot of time in things that are not used for men, like being careful how you dress, being careful how you look, being careful because you have to consider that many things can happen. I do remember that at some point I had to give something to a professor and I had to go to his office. So for me, doing that was a challenge. I really had to spend like 24 hours thinking, what should I wear? Because that guy didn't make me feel comfortable. And I realized that that's something that doesn't happen to guys. And it was through speaking about it and the community becoming a bit more open on the experiences of women in science and bioinformatics that I realized that was not normal, that didn't happen to boys, and that it was not okay, and that we take a lot of our time on things that we shouldn't. and that's at some point it does have a toll on the work we do, because 24 hours thinking how you dress, imagine what could I have done that day. Probably something much more useful than thinking whether my t-shirt was too sexy or not. It was a t-shirt. I shouldn't have been doing that. And that's really, and also like some things that I thought that could happen only in Mexico, and that happened either in Europe or in Canada. So at some point, I always thought that the Mexican culture was the macho culture, and if I got any discrimination, would be here from Mexicans, and it actually never happened. Well, but that professor that was Mexican, I got more discrimination from people in Canada and in Europe sometimes, and I don't know if it was only for being a woman or a minority, but so salary discrimination never happened to me in Mexico. It happened in other places. So that's one of the things that I realized, that at some point, even if Latin America has challenges, sometimes we are making more progress than other places, which is great. We should make it more progress. We shouldn't just keep it that way. Thank you.
Hi, so I think I will echo a lot of Alejandra said, because I also felt, usually in undergrad, I was surrounded by lots of women, but then in my PhD, when I moved to computational chemistry, computational drug design, then I started being much more surrounded by men in the lab and also in the conferences. And I guess in Brazil, we have some similarities. For example, we don't face this problem of salary discrimination either, because most of us work in federal universities or research institutes, and the salary is determined based on your position. It doesn't matter if you are a man or a woman, so there is no salary negotiation, like I think it's a lot more common in the US. And and we have, for example, in my department, I think women are pretty well represented, and even in leadership positions, for example, as the head of the department, head of the institute, recently, positions like that. I also agree in terms of, let's say, worrying about discrimination. I think there may be some prejudice against Latin Americans. So I also felt more in the US, I guess mostly when I was more in the US than when I was in Europe. Sometimes I would hear jokes which were a bit discriminatory, and that was new, because in Brazil, I guess there are enough women around me that it wouldn't be so common. But so, as I said, just to reinforce, I think in terms of challenge, the point when I realized that things became a lot more difficult and challenging was when I became a mom, because then we have a big maternity leave, which is terrific. I get to spend time with my son, but then it's very different from the time that men get, and I'm still gonna have to compete with them when I'm trying to get grants approved and publish papers. So for me, it has been the most challenging point as a woman.
Thank you, Rafaela. Your experience resonates a lot with mine. I'm also I recently became a mom, and the challenges are quite similar. Please go ahead, Sandrine.
Thank you, Selene. So I'm really glad to hear Alejandra and Rafaela that right away raised the issues of negative biases against the Latin American culture. So I think it's great to see that. being addressed. I think I forgot to say, but it should be obvious from my name also and my accent that I'm French originally. So I've experienced a bit of the French culture, grew up partly in Canada, and then I've spent the past 26 years of my life, so more than half of my life in the US. So I kind of have a sense of how, the different countries compare. So personally, I do not recall having had to overcome challenges linked to being a woman or having been myself personally, again, discriminated against. However, there's an image that will always stick in my mind is my first day of college. So I did my high school in France and then moved to Canada for my undergrad. And I went to an engineering class. And then I was one of 3 women out of hundreds of students. So until then, I had been in a French public high school where the gender balance was more or less even. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, wow, this was my first confrontation really with this, the gender imbalance in science. Then I went to fields that were, where there was more of an equal representation of women than engineering back then. So my experiences have been mostly second hand, and then I became more and more aware of these diversity issues as I became more senior, because I had more students or colleagues come to talk to me. So especially now as chair, this is something that I try to be particularly mindful of, and trying to support women and underrepresented minorities around me and make sure there's a climate that really allows them to grow and prevent these discriminating issues. So I'm actually mostly here to learn and see how I can better support people in my field. And I should just say one ironic thing is it was quite recently, I did have women colleagues, which was kind of hurtful, fault me for not having women-like quality. For example, women-like quality would be to show your feelings, right? And I don't think that's part of the job requirement, right? But then faulting me for having men-like qualities, which should be to stand your ground. And I don't think these comments would have been applied to a male colleague.
Yes, thank you, Sandrine, for your experience and for being aware of these issues as a person who has some ability to change how the system works. Please go ahead, Morgane.
So honestly, I didn't really expect that I would have firsthand, let's say, experience with such issues. But I realized during my PhD, I think I can really relate it to the day I received my laptop. So that was quite early in my PhD, which was a Macintosh. And the guy who was in my office told me, "Oh, Morgane, you just got a Linux for Barbie." And then I realized that from that very day, I was seen as the girl of the lab. And that was really mean. And then I realized that it was a difference. And then I was in another lab. And then I realized that my expertise was actually undermined. Like, I'm kind of a geek girl, and I totally assume it. And I'm able to change a hard drive. And the boss of the lab actually didn't even think that I could be able to do that. So he asked the guys of the lab, but he never went to me to ask if I could change the hard drive of the machine. And I really took it badly because first I was able to do it. Second, the guy who didn't actually know how to do it. And the fact that they didn't think about me, I really didn't like that. And then it went better, I would say. And then a bit like Sandrine noticed, as I was, let's say, getting more senior in my positions, I really became aware of what is called the glass ceiling. So the fact that you can see the higher positions, but you realize that you will never get them. And that's really how I started to feel like I will probably not be able to get a better position than I have. And I'm happy with my position, but I would like to be able to know that I could do better if I wanted to. So I would say the joke, I would say, so I relate to Rafaela on that. And for the mom part, I have 2 kids. They are still young, and indeed it made a difference. So definitely, I'm not seen as a mom, so that's not really the issue, but it's more like I'm seen as the person who doesn't have the time to do extra things. And this is what I don't like, because these extra things are actually not part of my job description. So yeah. And the last point, maybe to relate to what Alejandra was telling about the conferences, when I was heading the French Society for Bioinformatics, I started to make statistics on the keynotes and the chairman for the conferences, and it was just terrible. There were years where there was absolutely no woman as keynote in our French yearly conference of bioinformatics. And I did everything I could to change that. So in a few years, it became 50-50, which I'm quite happy that with our team, we managed to do that. And we also put it for the chairwomen, so that at least it was more representative of the persons who were attending the conference. So I think we did what we could on that. Yeah.
Many thanks, Morgane. So I would like now to ask you a few questions, and this is more like an open to whoever wants to answer them. So my first question was actually, what are some challenges you have experienced as a woman in science, which you already, I think you all sort of answered in the previous round. So I also would like to ask you, what do you love about working in bioinformatics or related areas? And I think that's quite important, because I find sometimes we focus a lot on the things that go wrong, but there is a reason we are still in an environment that is not very accepting and like easygoing with us. We still perseverating, I guess that's how you say it. Like we still persevere in trying to pursue this career. So please, I don't know if you want to raise your hand or just open your mic.
Hi, so as I said, I work on drug design, computational drug design, and that's a passion I have since my undergrad, when I started hearing about how it is possible to design molecules based on a protein structure and to rationalize so that you can avoid off targets. And I just think it's fascinating that you can use computer simulations to try to understand if molecules will interact, which compound will be a better ligand to a given protein, and that you can use bioinformatics to reduce the amount of wet lab work that you're going to do. So it's really, really powerful to create hypotheses in the computer and really to optimize the wet lab work.
Thank you, Rafaela. Okay, Alejandra. Oh, well, Alejandra and then Sandrine.
Yeah, sorry, didn't see you. So I really like, so I work in regulatory genomics, and what I like is to learn what's directing what's happening in the cell. And that's something that I like since the beginning. Actually, in my admission to the genomic sciences program, I said that I really didn't like genetics because they were too focused just on genes. And I really like the other part, like what's turning on and off the genes, like why would they do that? I didn't realize that that was regulatory genomics. I had no idea at the time. Non-coding DNA was junk DNA, and I ended up working with that. And what I really love is to use all these data, next generation sequencing data models, and come up with the answer of how a cell decided something. And that's actually something that I love. I also really like bioinformatics because I like the challenge of programming. So I always enjoy my programming classes and my calculus classes, because when you get the answer, it feels so well. As Elena said, a lot of things go bad. Most of the time we get incorrect answers, or the program doesn't run. But when it does, it feels so nice and reassuring. And I love that sensation, and I think I live for it. So I really like programming also because of that. Yeah, that's me.
Great, thank you, Alejandra.
Sure. So I think Alejandra and Rafaela have already given great reasons for why bioinformatics is a great area to work in. So for me, I guess the extra component of that is I started out in pure math, and I could have spent the rest of my career in an office not doing anything that had any applications. But I remember my first class in genetics in high school thinking, it was still Mendelian genetics back then. And I was like, wow, this is so cool how we can affect health, by these genes. And so working as somebody that was trained originally in math, being able to work on problems that have a direct impact on health or on the environment is something really cool. And I'm also a person that likes variety. So I could spend my days either talking to a collaborator in neurobiology and learning all these really cool problems and questions in neurobiology, or developing statistical methodology, which is close to math, or also I really enjoy software development. So having this variety is fantastic. And being in academia, there's also the variety between doing research and then teaching. And you've already mentioned how much you appreciate teaching. So I feel those are big pluses for being in our field. And I'm really glad you asked this question, Selena, because it's not an easy job. Right. And I think I've told that from the beginning of my career. I used to tell that to my students. It's like the moment I don't feel I'm contributing, I quit. So I think you have to be, it's like a passion, I think you have to have for that, because those are long hours, even irrespective of the gender biases and obstacles that women have to overcome. It's a tough job, long hours. So I think it has to be meaningful.
So maybe if I can add, I really relate to all that. And one last point maybe is I think there is a very nice community in bioinformatics, at least the one in France, but I think it's the same worldwide because I've seen it in other places. And I found really very interesting people that I really want to discuss, exchange, do things together, even if it's not necessarily to advance research, but to build other networks or teaching networks or platform networks, things like that. And this is something that I really, really like in bioinformatics, and I'm not sure it's the case in all the fields. So, yeah.
Thank you, everyone. You pretty much have most of my perception. Like even being as a mom, like barely sleeping when babies are little, etc. And I still find motivation to work at night because it's so fun. I love it. So yeah, it's a great career for obsessed people like us, I guess. So. Talking about the community that you were touching on, Morgane, one of the questions I had is exactly that. Like I didn't want to touch so much upon the challenges. I mean, if you want to talk a bit more about the challenges, but the reality is that even though it's supposed to be a meritocracy in science, we know when we measure the data that women are underrepresented, underpromoted, underpaid, and so on and so forth. So my question to you is what do you think we could change to increase the representation of women and also of other underrepresented groups in bioinformatics? What can we do as a community in using this great community we already have, and also potentially in our different institutions?
Yeah, so I think that things started to change when we started speaking up. I really realized that things changed. As Morgane said before, everything was like men everywhere in conferences, chairs, everyone was a guy. And then it started to change because women speak up. But it's not only women. And at some point, we need allies, because obviously people that do not listen to women, that don't think women can be keynotes, that don't think women can be chairs, won't do it by themselves. And they usually won't really listen to women telling, guy, you should put more females as keynotes. they will listen to other guys saying like, you know, maybe you are wrong. And allies are extremely important. And I have lived the effect of having an ally in my corner, someone that would speak up and say, oh, you know, you're actually being discriminative to her. And then things changing because of that. And I think the community in bioinformatics is doing well because women are speaking up, because we also have a voice. We appreciate allies, but we also have a voice. And allies, because they help us being listened. They just say, like, you know, she's speaking. That helps so much. And that's something that I try to bring into. I'm a president of the Mexican Network of Bioinformatics. So that's something that we try to integrate, that women know that they have a voice, but that guys know that women should be let speak. So that's also something important, and I try to encourage that not only with my students in my lab, but in the bioinformatics community in Mexico as much as I can.
Okay. Thank you, Alejandra. Morgane?
Yeah, so I totally agree with Alejandra, and one of the things that I think is very important is the idea of mentoring. So I actually realized that I informally benefited from mentoring of other women that are a bit older than me, and that were kind enough to listen to me and help me through my career. And I think this is something that could really help a lot of women in bioinformatics. And this is something that I think would be worth putting effort into building, like a network of mentor-mentees, where every girl would have, well, women would have maybe both position, like being a mentor for someone who is a bit younger and being a mentee with someone who is a bit older. And I think this could really, really help.
Yeah, so if I can add on to that before Rafaela's opinion. So I recently virtually attended an MBL conference on gender roles and their impact in academia, and they touch upon the mentorship relationship, and it appears that the mentorship relationship works better when it's informal, actually. When it's formally organized, it doesn't seem to be as effective, but it's still definitely useful. And the other thing that Alejandra mentioned is this part where of people who don't want to listen, who don't think this is a problem, they're generally the drivers of this bias. This has been measured with data, that the people who don't think there is a bias are the ones driving the bias. Please go ahead, Rafaela.
So I agree with what you have said already. And another point that I think is quite important and goes back to a comment that Sandrine made is that we have lots of stereotypes, like characteristics that are supposed to be of a man or a woman. And also that also relates to jobs, that people expect that men will do better or women will do better. So I think we can also do a lot trying to attract younger people, showing examples, having the opportunity of women scientists to talk to kids and to say, hey, I'm a woman and I am in science, and if you want, that's a job that you can have too, because so there are studies that show that these stereotypes, they start really, really early. Children already associate some professions with men or women. And there is really no reason for that. So I think we should target young people too.
Okay, thank you, Rafaela. Sandrine, do you want to?
Yes, please. I think it was just to add to what everything's already been said, especially there's this expression that comes up all the time, is the pipeline. And I think that's what Rafaela was mentioning. We want to start with young girls, basically. And I just watched this movie. We had an event actually on campus at Berkeley to watch the movie picture a scientist. And there was one of the professors in that movie that used a great expression that stuck with me, which is, if you can see it, you can be it. So I think for school children to see accomplished women scientists is a powerful image, and hopefully that can, at least show them that they could be that person later if they like science. But I think we also need more than that. Just the image is to and I don't have, this is more of a question actually, I don't have a solution to that, but really make sure that school children, young girls, that, when they go to high school, then they take the right classes. And then when they go to university, they don't get discouraged from taking physics or math or chemistry. And then I think each step of the way we lose, it's like a funnel, and then we sort of lose. So I think it's, the image is one thing, but having mechanisms so that we don't, start with a solid base of young women and then keep losing as we move up, I think is the hard part, and I don't have any good solutions to that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all the points made. Well, the other thing I wanted to touch on is how the pandemic has affected your work as a scientist. There has been a lot of discussion about how the current conditions, in particular quarantine and having no schools, has it appears, well, from everything I have read, it seems it might have affected more women who have care duties, and not only women, like people who have care duties. I mean, either parents or children or whatever it is. But I just wanted to know, what is your experience in the current situation, and how what have you done to try to cope with it, basically? Go ahead, Morgane, and then.
So in France, we were in quarantine from March to May, and it radically changed my life as a scientist. I mean, I have my 2 kids at home, one of which I had to teach. He's 8 years old, so I had to do him class during the day. And my husband was working as well, and my 3-year-old, she just wanted to have fun. Which was not possible. So she was screaming all day long that she wanted to go outside and see her nanny. So that was really, really difficult. And at the same time, we had to move all our teaching online with colleagues that are not bioinformaticians and who didn't know how to do video conferences. So I don't know if it's because I'm a woman or because I'm just me, but I decided to help them. So I spent a lot of time to help my colleagues to learn how to use Zoom or go to meeting or whatever, calling them when they were doing classes and so on. And that used a lot of my time. And in addition, because it was not enough, I know how to sew. Well, yeah, yeah. So I started to make mask and protective wear for the doctors, because we didn't have enough in France. So I felt that I needed to help, not only for science, but also for everyday life in my country. And I think this is what made the difference, because as I was doing that and feeling useful for that, my male colleagues, because I'm sorry to say it, but that was mostly the case, we didn't have responsibilities. They just took this time to write more papers and do everything that they didn't have the time to do. And so the gap became huge. And now, several months after, the gap is not closed, and really far from being closed. And I just learned 2 hours ago that we are again in quarantine in France for the next weeks. So I am not really, confident about the upcoming weeks. But indeed, again, I will have to do most of the chores at home. And my husband is really helping, but he also has to work. I mean, it's, yeah. So that's it.
Yeah, thank you, Morgane. And
so in Brazil, we started working from home in March. We didn't have a lockdown like in some countries in Europe, but we do have, we are encouraged to stay at home, and at the university even more than in other places. And since March, we are in that situation. So we have already 7 months working from home and without schools. And I have, my son is 1.5-year-old. So we need to take care of him the whole time. Fortunately, my husband is also a university professor. So what we do is that we take turns. I work for an hour and then he works for an hour. And we do that during the whole day. It's really tiring. And it basically reduces, we try to start early, but it reduces almost by half the amount of time that we can work every day. So it has been tricky, but as I just want to reinforce that I still don't think that I am in the worst situation, because at least I can share childcare with my husband, half and half. And I think lots of women are in the situation that they basically cannot work because there is no school, and if their partner is not working from home, there is basically no one to share childcare with. And just on top of that, we also had to start teaching online. So there was this whole process of recording every class and preparing new activities. It's just a whole new setup for teaching. And in addition of that, continuing to do research and related to COVID or not. So a lot of work and reduced time to work on it.
Yes, that resonates a lot with me.
Sure. So I can see, I think, two main really very negative consequences of the pandemic. So the one that already the burden on people that have families. So it's, you've already elaborated very well on that, Rafaela and Morgane. The other one is the social isolation. I've seen that particularly with students. They don't necessarily have families there or friends. They're from other countries. In Berkeley, we have a lot of international students. Some of them are working from their home country. Others are in Berkeley, but just basically we haven't been on campus actually since March. So that's something that's really concerning to me. So we're trying to reach out as much as we can to our students, make sure we have, so because they could very well be on Zoom all week, right, and only doing purely academic things and missing out on just bumping into each other in the corridor or in the coffee room or on campus. So it's a real challenge to try to recreate this sort of connection that you have informally and online. And we're trying with things like reading group, with socials, and it's not the same, but I think this is something we have to really try doing, and try a few social distancing in-person events. So instead of having my whole group at once, like I'm just having one person at a time that I meet outside with masks, and that helped a little bit. I saw my students for the first time in almost 7 months last week, and we thought it would be only a 1-hour meeting, but it was 5 hours, and we were so happy to see each other and not talk just about work. So that's the other big challenge in my mind.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, so just to build on what Sandrine said, so that's really a challenge, and I think for a lot of people. So I try to be super open with my students and with everyone around, but I have some mental health issues, like I easily go into depression. So for me, the quarantine at the beginning was like, let's bake a lot of things and be happy. But at some point, it kicked in, and I felt very sad and unmotivated, and I really didn't want to work. I have a very supportive partner, and he talked to me and he tries to take care of me. But at some point, I have to go back to therapy. I know that's part of who I am, and I think that's very important because it's something that is still a taboo. And people don't like to talk about it and don't feel comfortable saying like, so I need help, I need to talk to someone professional and reach out. And there are some services, at least in the University of Mexico, even from the states, some from the different regions, so you can call if you are feeling sad, if you are feeling bad, and it really does help. And I think that at least the pandemic should be a way to start talking about these issues, because it's tough and it can really affect how you work, how you relate even. So that's also something important. So I think, yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm back. Sorry. So I think that's a very important point, and I think it has been very drastic, the change, right? Like you're overburdened with having your family on top of you all the time, as an analogy, or you're completely alone, and it's very unhealthy in either way. So we all need help in different ways, and we need to seek it out. And well, we have a bit of time for probably just a couple of questions. So one of the questions from Kat Brusbank from EMBL is EBIMBL is, if you could change one thing to reduce the challenges caused by combining motherhood with a career in science, what would it be? And specifically, she asked Rafaela and me, but I mean, I think Morgane, you can also definitely chip in. I would say I'm gonna answer quickly. Like, to me, the main thing right now it's daycare. Like it's difficult. We actually found daycare arrangements because we had been in the same situation as Rafaela, like just basically since March being in lockdown, and I was already having. I love my child, but I was completely unable to work. And the thing is, he was much more able to suit himself and be with other people before. And then he realized I was there all the time. So he would just cry mama hard enough until mama appeared. That became really, really hard. So we had to find a solution. But to me, it's that, like, having support from institutions for daycare, and also support for not having this culture. I find in Latin America it's very encouraged to have really long working hours, and I'm not sure. I mean, we have all found out we can do a lot of work in a very short time right now, so I don't think it's really necessary, and just accommodating for people who have care duties, whichever they might be, and not making feel guilty for it. I think that would be a great start. I don't know if you want to add on to that, Rafaela and Morgane. And
well, one thing that I think is still a big difference in Brazil, as I said, is when you take maternity leave, it is 6 months for women and 20 days for men. So I think that should be more equal to that would already be a huge help, because half a year is a lot of your time that you're staying at home. And the other thing is to recognize that people have had children recently when you evaluate them. So I've seen some examples of initiatives like that. For example, okay, we are considering applications from people who got their PhD up to this year. But if you had one child, you can be considered for one additional year. Or, for example, if we're going to look at your productivity, we are going to look to a bigger period, so that reflects how you work and what do you do at normal conditions, and sort of dilutes the impact that your productivity is almost certainly going to suffer when you start when you become a mom or also a father, right? It's more intense for women, but I think it also has to be recognized for fathers.
Thank you. Morgane, you want to add on to?
I read this paper already some time ago, and I'm sorry I don't remember the name, but of the author, unfortunately. But it was about how to sort of win the mother academic mentor scientist marathon. I loved reading that paper because it was extremely positive, and it was saying that the person actually became more efficient since she was a mom. And I truly think that it's the case, at least for me. But it also changed the view that people have on you, because indeed I don't have so much time to lay and have a long coffee or, just stay for after work beer or things like that. And if I would change something, and it's impossible, but that would be the way people see a mother who is scientist, because I wouldn't change what I did. And something that I did and that was very badly seen when I was in Germany was that I went back to work just after the maternity leave, so 2 months after. And people were asking me, "Where is your baby?" And I'm like, "He's at home with my husband. He's taking care of it." And they were like, "Oh, no, but you have to stay 1 year at home." And I'm like, no. I need to work. And it's really okay because my husband is really good with my kid. And he took a year off, and he's super glad for it, and I'm glad that he did it. But the way people were looking at us, this is something that is not fine.
All right, thank you. I think we have time for just one more question. There's a few others, but yeah, I'm not sure if we can go much longer. But this is a question for Alicia, from Alicia Mastreta Yañez from Conavio. She's asking, when organizing a conference, hiring, or something else, what do you answer when someone tells you that you have to get the best person, regardless if they're a woman or a man, and that is inverse discrimination if you select a woman because it's only men, etc.?
Yeah, so I have gotten that question a lot lately, actually. So one thing is there's no such things as inverse discrimination, because discrimination, it has to do with power and privilege. And there's not such thing, there's like no one is really discriminating you. They are just not letting you have all the privilege that you are used to, and you don't like it because you like to have 2 candies. Now you can only have 1. So that doesn't exist, and it should not be talked in that way. And about whether they are selecting the best person, I always tell them that we all have biases. We are part of a culture. We grew up here. We have that bias, and we have to acknowledge it. And that's the way we learn to overcome them. So whenever they say that it's just because it's the best person, like, are you sure? Just think for a second that you have that bias, that you have a bias to think that a scientist has to be an old white man. And if you have it, are you sure you are not using it? And then they will think like, maybe they will feel very uncomfortable. Probably they hate me for a little while. But I think that it helps some people to start thinking that maybe we all have biases. And I also try to tell them that I have the bias. I consider myself a feminist. And I just realized like 2 weeks ago that I call my students, my female students, I call them girls. So, and that's a bias. That's a bias that I have, and I'm trying to overcome it. I just realized it. I will try not to do it anymore because it's not good for them either, or for me, because they are women. They are women in science. They are not girls. So that's something that I tell them, that I'm also part of the culture, and it takes a lot of work. It feels uncomfortable, but it's nice to feel so uncomfortable because that means that we're changing something. And that's.
I think I'd like to add one thing also. As this, if this person is a scientist, I would ask them, how do you define best? What are your variables, right?
Yes, absolutely. I have a personal policy of not participating in all male panels. I just mentioned like, sorry, you have only males, I won't be participating in this. Doesn't go well all the time, but okay.